Science Venture Program, which is a program that falls under the Life Science Tennessee Foundation and is supported by Launch Tennessee. Our executive director, Abby Trotter, is here. She'll have a few words in just a moment. But thank you for joining us today. This is one of our LSVP educational series. A huge thank you to PYA for hosting and leading today's session. We're going to be hearing a lot of really great information about compliance considerations as a startup. And a thank you to Zach Doolin and Sarah Bowman for leading us. I think they're going to be imparting quite a bit of wisdom for us today, and I'll let them introduce themselves further once they get started. Abby?
Thanks, Carrie. I just wanted to say to the group gathered and for those online, on behalf of Life Science Tennessee and the network that we have of life science companies and people that are interested in helping the life sciences grow across our state, thank you so much for being here. Tom Ballard has been a loyal supporter and board member for quite a while of Life Science Tennessee. And so has Audrey Delpote from ETSU Innovation Labs. So glad for all of you to be here today. Life Science Tennessee is interested in helping any kind of life science company grow and expand their investments and their jobs in the state. We know that these are great paying jobs and important for the economic development of our state. We do networking events. We're going to have one just after this. So join us down at Schultz Brow. We've got about 40 people that are going to show up that are from the industry in and around Nashville and Knoxville. That's where I am today. And supporters of the life sciences from all over this region. So we also do advocacy and policy work, supporting innovation throughout the state. So just happy to be here, and thank you again to PYA and to Tom, and thank you to our presenters. So I'll turn it over to you now.
Thank you. Well, I guess I'll start by saying I'm Zach Doolin. I'm a principal at PYA. I've been here my whole career, ever since I was an intern from college. So I don't know how many, 16, 17, 18 years now, something like that. I started out in our tax department. So I was a tax accountant. That's our, PYA was founded in 1983 as an accounting firm. We do tax and audit work, but the primary focus of our business now is healthcare advising. And that's how we touch life sciences. Similar, we're here to help life sciences companies grow any way that we can. We do a lot of different type of work. We do compliance items that Sarah will talk about. We do, in the back corner, Pat Lewis was here. He does our...
He stepped out.
He stepped out. He does our accounting and advisory services, so bookkeeping, financial statements, anything like that, from getting a business going to understanding why your net revenue is not, it's growing, but your bottom line is not. So we do all that different type of work in accounting. We've got offices in 6 different areas and clients in all 50 states. We've done a lot of different work with lots of different health, life science companies. I'm used to saying healthcare companies because I work primarily on the physician side of things. I work for a lot of hospitals and health systems with physician arrangements. As a part of that, I also get involved with speaking arrangements, key opinion leader arrangements with life science companies. Medical device company wants to hire a physician to help talk about a product, to research a product. We can help look at those different types of arrangements. Throughout the day today, Sarah's going to talk about the compliance side of things, and I'll kind of finish this off with a little bit of fair market value, a little bit of commercial reasonableness, keeping it simple and basic. And then we handed out a checklist for everyone here. It's a life sciences checklist that will cover a lot of the different compliance, fair market value, and commercial reasonableness items. If you don't like paper, leave it. We're also going to send a PDF. So you'll have a PDF copy. So if you don't want the paper, we'll recycle it. We'll hand it out to someone else. But we will cover just a little bit of that toward the end. Probably most importantly, if you have questions, ask them. We're here to help you. We want to help you with any questions that you have. If we can answer the question, if not, we'll tell you that let's talk later about it. But please, as we go, don't feel like you're interrupting. If there's something you want us to clarify or ask more about, please do. Happy to do that along the way. We did save a little time at the end as well for questions, but the more interactive, the faster the time will go. If you need coffee or drinks, they're all in the back. And Sarah, I'll let you introduce yourself as you start us off.
Awesome. Thanks, Zach.
just everybody on the phone or on the Zoom, you guys are okay sound wise? I can just get like a head nod. Okay, I see Tyna nodding. Very good. Perfect. Our technology is working, knock on wood. So I'm Sarah Bowman. I'm also a principal here in Knoxville, along with Zach and others. Really excited to see everyone online and in person here in our offices. I started my healthcare career right out of school, working within the revenue cycle for a nonprofit health system. And did that for a while, went back to school, got my MBA, was introduced to PYA actually through my MBA program. Came to work here, was recruited away, and then came back. So I've been back with the firm for 11 years now. It's been a fantastic place to be, place to work, place to grow your career. We get to have exposure to clients in all 50 states. As Zach mentioned, we get to help people with different problems every single day. So it's a really cool place. Zach mentioned, serving healthcare clients and using that term. I may slip up and talk about physicians or providers in this presentation for the most part. Some of that terminology can be interchanged when we think about compliance specific to you all, specific to those providing services in the life sciences space. Everything is not interchangeable, so I will try to point out those things that are a little bit different. Our goal today is to keep it high level enough that we're equipping you with some good information to start. Some of my slides are a little bit dense from an information perspective. Stay with me, I promise. We'll bring it back up. I'll go down to the weeds just a little bit, but I promise I'll bring it back up. If you have questions at any point, please do speak up, interject. We can have a lively discussion. We're a small enough group that happy to take questions whenever they pop up. So what is compliance? The general definition of compliance is that you're meeting the expectations of others. I thought that this was interesting. Compliance, when we think about healthcare providers, and we are lumping you all into that definition of healthcare providers for today's presentation, they are activities that assist organizations with conducting operations and activities ethically, in an ethical way. With the highest level of integrity and in compliance with legal and regulatory requirements. Compliance for healthcare providers helps prevent violations and reduce the risk and liability to the organization. So at the end of the day, we'll talk about some sort of scary statistics about what it means to be in compliance or out of compliance, and kind of what the federal government is really cracking down on, and how they view compliance in this space and the importance of it. If you remember nothing else about anything else that I say today, you'll get a copy of these slides. But if you remember nothing else about today, I hope that you remember that compliance is the least expensive for the organization when it is done in a proactive manner. It is the most expensive when it is done after the fact, when there's already a problem that we're trying to work through and remediate. And that's true whether we're talking to, a small physician practice in East Tennessee, or a large, integrated health system, or a life sciences company. It's true across the board. That is universally true. There used to be a statistic on, a dollar spent toward compliance efforts results in this much in kind of cost to the organization saved. I'm not going to try to repeat it because I will mess it up, but just know that I'm sure you can probably Google it. ChatGPT will probably give you a good answer on what that is, but it is really thinking about it from a proactive stance, especially as you are starting up your organization and your operations. I bragged on technology, so then that means my slides are going to be on a delay. All right, so mandates for compliance. There are a lot of organizations that have some sort of compliance requirement element to them. The Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, they have some compliance expectations for providers, anybody that's going to be billing and receiving payment for services from Medicare and Medicaid. They expect organizations to establish a culture that promotes prevention, detection, and resolution of instances of conduct that don't conform to federal and state law or to federal healthcare programs. The Affordable Care Act added some layers to that that expect to curb healthcare provider fraud and abuse. And then all healthcare providers that are enrolled in Medicare, Medicaid, and CHIP, which is the Children's Healthcare Insurance Program, they are required to establish a compliance program as a condition of enrollment, which we'll talk about more here in a minute. And these are expectations in addition to some of the others that we will mention. This slide was a bit of a challenge when I was putting together the materials for this presentation, because all of the things that are covered by compliance, so to speak, all of the green words on this slide could easily be their own standalone presentation that we could spend 45 minutes or an hour or maybe even more on each of these individual topics. So today I'm going to try to keep it very high level and point out the things that we really want to make sure you're familiar with. So what is covered by compliance when we think about compliance for healthcare? First and foremost, the False Claims Act. The False Claims Act is intended to identify and prevent areas of fraud, waste, and abuse. It requires penalties on a per violation basis for knowing and willing either reckless disregard or indifference. So you're knowing and willingly doing something, or you're doing it in such a way that you're indifferent as to whether or not you're sort of following the rules or not. The anti-kickback statute involves providing incentives or bribes for services. It is an intent-based statute. It has a criminal component to it. There are some specific safe harbors, which I'll run through very, very quickly. And the anti-kickback statute, or AKS, can be broad. So it is not limited solely to, physicians or providers of care. It can include other individuals as well. So sometimes you'll hear or see in the news about, the owner of a pharmacy that has gotten themselves in trouble, or the owner of a durable medical equipment company. Those are examples of where the anti-kickback statute may have been or is alleged to be in violation of the anti-kickback statute. The Stark Law is also known as the Physician Self-Referral Law. I don't know, show of hands, if are these terms familiar to individuals in this room a little bit? Okay, all right. Good. So the Stark Law involves financial relationships for physicians. So it involves billing and referring for services in which the physician has a financial incentive, a financial relationship, an ownership interest, if you will, in. Civil monetary penalties are a little bit self-explanatory there. Those are settlement agreements for problems, compliance violations. HIPAA, I think typically most folks are familiar with HIPAA at this day and age. We've probably all, as healthcare consumers, been on the receiving end of a letter. Your information may have been leaked in a breach, or something has happened. You should change your password. Unfortunately, those are becoming pretty common these days. So HIPAA obviously applies. And then we have the bottom half of this slide are broader regulatory considerations that are impacted, involve lots of types of businesses, lots of types of providers, obviously harassment and retaliation, making sure that you're adhering to OSHA from an employee safety perspective. You have EEOC standards that protect against employment discrimination. The other item that I just wanted to call out on this slide is the whistleblower key TAM line. That is essentially allows for anyone to bring forth a compliance concern and report it. And it is, the federal government really wants to incentivize that, and they have incentivized that. And so it could be a patient, it could be an employee, it could be a member of the C-suite, a member of management, a healthcare provider, a physician. Anybody really can be a relator and bring forth a risk, an area that they have identified that they feel is improper. The government may or may not intervene in those situations, but anybody can bring those forward, and they make for splashy headlines when the government does get involved and intervene. Those cases can go on for quite some time, but oftentimes they will result in some type of a settlement, and the relator gets a portion of that settlement. So the relator has some financial incentive to kind of see that through. In addition to the items that are included on this slide, I also wanted to just quickly mention the Yates memo. The Yates memo established some individual accountability from a corporate standpoint. So it is intended to incentivize corporate behavior change in a positive way. So it's intended to incentivize, let's put some pressure on the leadership of healthcare organizations. They need to be concerned about compliance. They need to make sure that their employees are doing the right thing, that their organizations are doing the right thing. And they can be held accountable at the end of the day. They can be held liable for the actions of the organization as well. And so that's where we think about educating folks like yourselves, educating board members, educating the members of your C-suite, the members of your management team, to make sure that they understand their responsibility toward maintaining a compliant organization. Under the False Claims Act, there are specific fraud, waste, and abuse components that we wanted to quickly cover. So as I mentioned, the False Claims Act imposes liability on persons who knowingly and willfully make material, false, fictitious, or fraudulent statements in connection with the delivery of payment for healthcare benefits. Any FCA penalty that's assessed is done on a per violation basis. It's typically somewhere between $12,000 and $25,000. So it's not something, really none of these items are things that you want to get tripped up with. But when we think about fraud, waste, and abuse, fraud is essentially the intentional deception or misrepresentation of a service, that something is knowingly occurring that should not be. So if you purposefully submit a claim or bill for services that were never actually given to a patient, or for a drug or for a device that was never actually provided. If you try to bill for something that's at a higher reimbursement than the services that were provided, for example, upbilling, upcoding, those sorts of things. Waste is obviously, as it sounds, it is unnecessary costs. Overutilization of services fits in that waste bucket. And then we have abuse. So that is when we have practices, provider practices that are inconsistent with sound fiscal, business, or medical practices that result in unnecessary costs to the Medicaid or Medicare programs, that you get reimbursement for services rather that are not medically necessary. There was a period of time where we saw a lot of this happening with cardiology services. We were seeing a lot of more invasive cardiovascular procedures and testing than were medically necessary in some pockets of the country. And so we see this from time to time. It's a lot like everything else in the business world. It's kind of cyclical. So we'll go through stages where we see perhaps some overutilization of certain types of services. We'll see some regulatory crackdown on that, some regulatory enforcement activity that has a tendency to change practice patterns and behavior. It's interesting how that works, right? Suddenly everybody kind of takes note and changes their behavior a little bit. But anything that is high cost to CMS or services that are of high volume typically are ripe for some enforcement activity. And so that's where you really want to make sure you've got your I's dotted and your T's crossed. With the advancement in technology that we have today from an AI perspective, we are seeing both the federal government and private payers, commercial payers, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Aetna, Cigna, United, become much better at data mining and having a lot more success with doing that. And so we're seeing activity outside of, I'll say traditional compliance from an OIG and DOJ perspective. We're also seeing some, important trends and activity from a commercial payer perspective as well. Oops. Sorry, I'm just on a little bit of a delay. So examples of fraud, waste, and abuse to kind of be mindful of. I think the referral relationship box on this slide is probably most pertinent to this group. Certainly not the only thing that could be pertinent to this group. But as I mentioned before, improper coding, improper billing, the use of providers that are not eligible to be rendering services to Medicare and Medicaid, and then kickbacks and inducements for referral relationships. Usually that referral relationship bucket is where a lot of folks can get tripped up. I skipped ahead and I didn't mean to. When we think about the other green items here. I think I mentioned the top couple on this slide are those that I definitely want to make sure this group is well-versed and familiar with. The anti-kickback statute that is involving incentives and bribes, that has a little bit different language in it from a regulatory perspective to prove that you are in violation of the anti-kickback statute. It still has that knowingly and willfully language like the FCA, but it is intent-based and it includes civil and criminal liability. So you can have civil monetary penalties as well as some criminal liability if you are found to be in violation of the anti-kickback statute. Criminal offenses, that is considered a felony. Civil monetary penalties for violation of the anti-kickback statute can be $100,000 per kickback, which that in and of itself can be material and add up quickly, plus treble damages. So 3 times damages on those. So fines plus treble damages, whereas the FCA are penalties per violation. There are specific exceptions associated with both the anti-kickback statute and Stark. So we mentioned Stark as being the physician self-referral requirement. So when we think about Stark, there are some Stark exceptions that Zach could talk to us about and probably do a whole presentation on. The Stark law is strict liability based, and it is a civil liability statute. Exceptions must be met in order to be okay from a Stark perspective, and it applies only to those financial relationships with physicians, as I mentioned, whereas the AKS is intent-based. Criminal liability can apply, and it can implicate both physicians as well as others. So that's where we think about more broadly from a leadership team perspective. And the AKS safe harbors, it's a should meet a safe harbor exception there. So I went a little fast. I wanted to back up to those items before we move along.
Sarah, correct me if I'm wrong, this is
Yeah.
more your area, but the way I always think about it is the Stark law doesn't matter whether you intended to do something wrong or not. If you did it, it was impermissible, you violated it. Whereas the kickback, you have to have intended to do it.
Correct.
So if you think of like a tax return, you accidentally deducted something that wasn't deductible versus you purposely deducted something you knew wasn't deductible. Stark law doesn't care. You did it or you didn't, you're in violation.
Yeah.
So it has certain exceptions that you must meet an exception or it's not permissible. Whereas the anti-kickback's a little different. That's how I always think about it from a non-compliance person.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's definitely one of those things that, want to be mindful of as you're starting up the organization, but also if and we can talk about kind of what that looks like from a compliance program standpoint. But if you ever get into a situation where, you have concerns, there are concerns that are being reported up through leadership, or, perhaps the organization has done some sort of review and has concerns, definitely involve legal counsel early. Healthcare, there are all sorts of very reputable, very knowledgeable healthcare attorneys that are ready and able to assist. So you want a healthcare specific attorney to help with that. So expectations for compliance oversight. This slide is really intended to be informational more than anything. Again, as I mentioned, these could all kind of be their own presentation. So I'll go quickly through the main thing to take away from here, besides the links for you all to have for reference purposes, is that we have expectations from a compliance program perspective out for healthcare organizations. And an important expectation are what we call the 7 elements of an effective compliance program. And these are not new. These have been around since the early 90s. This was part of the federal sentencing guidelines for organizations, and they primarily are indicators of the federal government's expectations for effective compliance activities. And so it's very interesting. You might kind of read through these icons on this slide and think, okay, this sounds not too crazy. This is something we can totally do. But really, if you are found to be in violation of one of those green items on the prior slide, part of the investigation process, let's say the review process of the particular issue, is going to be what type of compliance structure did the organization have when this issue occurred? Did they take compliance seriously? Was there proper education that had happened across their C-suite, their board, their employees? Did they have that high level oversight? Did they have documented policies and procedures of how things were supposed to happen within the organization? Did they provide regular training and education? Typically, we like to see those things happen on an annual basis with documentation that that the training has occurred across all employees. That there is some consistent enforcement of the standards. So, you know, if somebody is not following the rules, if somebody is not following the policies and procedures of the organization, that's acted upon and followed up on, that there's some sort of remediation that happens there. And that if there are complaints within the organization, complaints from patients, complaints from providers, that those things are taken seriously and that they're followed up on. You know, generally, healthcare providers will have a compliance tip line where they can anonymously file a complaint and say, I'm worried about, you know, XYZ issue. And it's not enough to just have the tip line. You've got to use it and follow up and document what you're doing for things that are that hit that tip line. And then last but not least, not everyone's favorite, but perhaps a very important item from this slide is doing some internal auditing and monitoring. I mentioned at the start of this that the least expensive way to do compliance is to do it proactively. And so auditing and monitoring is a huge component of that. You're never going to know that you have any issues if you don't kick the tires from time to time to try to find out how things are going. There are a number of settlements. It's an easy Google search to see kind of what is happening within the healthcare space. This has been going on for years now. In more recent years, we're seeing more and more Department of Justice settlements related to the False Claims Act and related to Stark. Those settlements can range from $10,000 up to multiple millions of dollars. Recently, we are seeing trends related to, as I mentioned earlier, medical necessity, some upcoding of services. In particular, for this group, just being aware of the perception of some sort of beneficiary inducement or paying kickbacks to incentivize the use or increase Medicare services. Those are important for this group to be aware of. Oftentimes, when the federal government picks up on this, whether it's because of a qui tam relator situation or their own type of investigation, it can become very expensive. Settlements typically involve paying that fine. There's, you know, some PR press that will come with that no one wants for their organization. But oftentimes those settlements also result in corporate integrity agreements, also known as CIA agreements. Those are costly for the organization because those typically require a specific set of steps and a review that's done. Most CIAs now are somewhere between 3 and 5 years in length. So that would mean every year for a 5-year period, the organization has an independent review organization. So an outside firm, outside party, do an assessment to make sure that the organization is staying true to those settlement terms under the corporate integrity agreement. So as a healthcare organization, it's important to be as proactive as possible to keep compliance as inexpensive as possible and avoid these. Other key themes, oftentimes there is some sort of a breakdown within the organization in processes and key controls. We see this oftentimes when an organization goes from being small to being quite large and rapidly. So rapid growth, it makes it challenging operationally to keep processes in place, to make sure everyone is educated, make sure everyone is doing the right thing, even with the best of intentions. And so that's where that proactive compliance really comes in to play. There are a number of relationships with referral sources that can be concerning and can result in problems. I'll call out a couple from this slide. Highly compensated physicians. Anytime you have a highly compensated physician, that is a risk for the organization. You want to make sure that that is necessary. I don't want to steal Zach's thunder. He'll talk more about what that means and how you can protect your organization and how that is structured. Paying for services above fair market value and then not having proof or evidence to support that you're paying something at fair market value. Again, that's an appetizer to what Zach will talk about here in just a little bit. Healthcare fraud is big business. And what that means is, it's big business for the federal government. So, there is a statistic, it's about 4 years old, I believe it's from 2021, that says that for every dollar that the government invested in healthcare fraud, review programs, data mining, reviews, audits from the OIG, so the Office of Inspector General, the Department of Justice, the DOJ, and the FBI, that was targeted for healthcare fraud. For every dollar of investment that was made, they got a $4 return on that investment. So that, if nothing else, that should tell you that it's not going to go away. It's going to continue, right? So that is going to continue to be something that we're going to have to watch for. I believe that statistic was the $1 invested for the $4 return was like a 3-year look back. So it would have crossed into kind of pre-COVID era. I don't have a more current statistic, but I would be willing to bet with the advancement in data mining and how we're kind of looking at things from a data-driven analytic approach, it's probably stayed the same or possibly even increased. There was a lot of instances of misuse of COVID funds, of some of the public health emergency lessening of controls and relaxing of policies. And so that had really opened up the door for, unfortunately, more fraud, waste, and abuse from some bad actors during that time. I already talked about key TAM relators and how that can be impactful as well. I'm going to keep going. Last but not least, this is kind of tying it back for you all specifically. I'm sorry, this is still a little bit smaller than I wanted it to be on the slides. Probably okay for you guys in front of the computer. For those of us in the room, it's still a little bit small. I apologize. These are all examples of biotech related settlement activity in the recent years. So I think the oldest on here is going back to 2021. But for example, in Oasis, they were found to have kickbacks that included some excessive consulting fees. They were providing really lavish dinners and luxury ski resort accommodations. That it didn't fly. So they were found guilty and had to do a $12 million settlement related to that. You can read the others on here, but these are just examples of how this can result in real dollars, unfortunately, from a settlement perspective.
Sarah?
Yes.
You might be you're getting to it. Never mind.
Did you want to add something, Tynan?
No, you're going to get to the speaker, the special fraud alert. I was going to say the interesting thing about the slide you just showed, all of those settlements occurred after that.
Yes.
The OIG speaker fraud alert was published. That was published, you'll see the very bottom of the slide, in 2020, which everybody was, unduly occupied with other things in 2020. So great time to publish something like this, but you can see if there's any correlation between what the government has put out and some of the settlements that have occurred. Most of those are related to engaging healthcare providers, physicians, et cetera, in activities that life science organizations have paid for. So just an interesting correlation between the two.
Yep. Thank you, Tynan. So all of those settlements were from 21 through, there's one, Pfizer was this year, 2025. And so that's the thing about some of these fraud alerts, some of these notices that come out, is sometimes they don't come out at the best time for providers, for organizations working in this space. So back in November of 2020, so you remember the COVID, start of COVID, if you will, was March of 2020. By November, we weren't necessarily a whole lot better off, depending on what market you were mainly operating in toward the end of 2020. So this special fraud alert came out that really targeted speaker programs. Since then, there's been some more activity. That's a great read. That link there is current for you all, just to be aware of as you're looking to kind of establish your processes and your documentation and your relationships. The other thing I wanted to mention specific for this group is the Sunshine Act. So physician payments are publicly available now and have to be publicly reported. They're posted annually online. This is the website there, Open Payments data.cms.gov, so that you can search by a provider, you can search by a life science company and see what activities are happening and what are the payments that are being associated with that. So again, that information is out there. It's publicly available. And so be mindful of that as you think about how you're engaging with key opinion leaders and healthcare providers, which Zach will talk about more in just a minute. This is my segue to Zach's piece, but when you're thinking about how to structure those arrangements and how to make sure that your organization is kept in compliance, think about what you are compensating and how it is being structured. So what are you paying for? How is that being structured? And then Zach's going to dive in more from a fair market value and commercial reasonableness perspective, but that is how you prevent running afoul of some of these compliance pieces that we've discussed today. Any questions before I pass the baton to Zach?
I have a question.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So we've started thinking about reaching out to surgeons for consulting or participating in a research study. How is this, how do you get in the process of publishing that information? If you start doing payments, is there an easy way to get, or are you required to report that also through that Sunshine Act?
You are required, if you're making a payment to the physician, the physician is also required, I believe.
To report.
So some of the examples Sarah mentioned, independent review organizations. So if we were the independent review organization, we've done this, we're engaged by the client or the government, either side. One of the things we'll do is we'll go out and we'll pull all the codes for every physician you've ever worked with, your health system. We'll pull then all the arrangements that same physicians worked for pharmaceutical or device companies and try to tie those together. And what you really have to be careful of is if you're a health system, your medical director that you pay to be your medical director is also getting hundreds of thousands of dollars from a medical device company. And you guys recently switched to that medical device. So that's a red flag. So the red flag is then, were those payments to the medical director, the speaker fees, were they fair market value? Were those reasonable fees, or could those be perceived as a kickback? Were you paying that physician a kickback to have them switch to your device? And that's where you have to make sure you're following the process of fair market value, commercial reasonableness. And there was a lot of pushback in the beginning. It was uncomfortable for some providers to have to disclose that information because some of our health system clients were not aware that their physicians were being paid these fees by outside parties. So in your case, you'd likely be the outside party, but it's absolutely something the physicians have to now disclose to the health systems that they work with, and they also have to report it. I'm not the reporting requirements expert, but I know both the physician and the healthcare provider, and it may be the health system has to report it, but the physician has to sign off that it's accurate. There's something I don't know exactly how that's right. Tynan's shaking her head, so I think Tynan's our lead of our life sciences practice. So she's shaking her head that maybe that's what it is.
Yeah, so if you are effectively a covered entity under some Sunshine Act, you have to then report according to the criteria that the link that Sarah put up there includes. If you're the provider, so if you're that surgeon that's getting paid, what you have a responsibility, you should have the responsibility of doing is going in and reviewing what that company is saying they're paying you. Because what you want to be able to do as that surgeon is make sure, because you're not the one that's sending the information in, the company, the med device or the life science company is. But what you want to do as the provider, to Zach's point, is make sure that what they say they're paying you is what you're getting paid. So what you as a life science entity needs to do is think about who you're paying, what you're paying, how you're going to report, how you're going to track what you're reporting. And to Sarah's earlier point, I think that's a discussion. We could go off on a whole nother discussion on, you know, how you do that, when you do it, why you do it, what software you could use to do it, what your policies and procedures should be. But yeah, if you're thinking about doing that, you need to look at the definition of are you covered or not, and then getting on the cycle of when you have to report it. The government's made it really easy though. I mean, they've got some, as painful as it is, there's some good literature that they publish to make it less onerous. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
The checklist that's sitting out in front of everyone will help with some of those things too. The checklist covers certain processes to document, ways to think about different types of arrangement. One of the subsections is speaker fees. Some things to consider specific to that. So Sarah talked a lot about fraud, waste, and abuse laws, and I promise you, I will not quote laws or get into that level of detail. I'm high level. I'm going to give you 10 steps total. That's it. Fair market value, commercial reasonableness. And it's going to be basic and high level, and I'm going to explain it without going into any regulations. So you want to enter into the arrangement with a physician to speak. First thing you need to do is determine if that arrangement is commercially reasonable. What's that mean? 5 steps. What's the business purpose? And the business purpose is as simple as, what are we doing and why are we doing it? Document it, think about it, does it make sense? Fair market value is sense, C-E-N-T-S, commercial reasonableness is sense, like, does that make sense? So your business purpose is simply that. Why does it make sense? Why should we do this? Does it make sense as a business for us to do this? Is it a compliant way for us to structure this arrangement? Is it compliant? Number 2, so you've determined you need it, you've determined it's appropriate, you've determined that you've got a good rationale for it. What type of provider do you need? Do you need a physician to do this? Does it have to be a physician of a certain type? What are the qualifications? What are the years of experience? Can it be any physician? Could it be a physician who hasn't practiced in a while? Does it have to be a surgeon? Is the provider that you've selected appropriate? And if that provider wasn't the right provider, could another physician do it? Those things impact fair market value. What are the requirements or limitations of the arrangement? If it's a speaker arrangement and the provider is being paid to speak, is the location of which the provider is speaking set up for speaking? So if the provider is giving a speech in the middle of a concert, during the concert, that's not a good place to pay somebody to give a speech. So that's a egregious example, but make sure that you understand you're being paid to speak, you're being paid to speak at this location to these people at this audience. Have that type of information. It shouldn't be open-ended. The resources available and alternatives, any arrangement you enter into, consider what was your alternative? Did you have to use that particular provider? Could it have been another provider? Could you have done this internally? Would it have made more sense for me to hire one physician to travel around the country versus 1,000 physicians, all to do the same thing? Those different types of things. Oversight and monitoring. This is the one that gets overlooked a lot. How did you structure the arrangement? Did you have a legal counsel look at it? You entered the arrangement 2 years ago, but you're still paying for it 2 years later. Should you still be paying for it? Was the service ever provided? When do you terminate the agreement? That's another one. And how do you know that the services were actually performed? So you paid somebody to speak. Did they speak? Did they show up? Those types of things. Very simple. And if you think about that outside of healthcare, those are all questions. If we were going to business, if we had a lemonade stand, we would ask all those same questions to ourselves to determine if it made sense for us to have a lemonade stand. So keep it simple and then document it. Document your rationale through it using those 5 steps. It's one of those topics we could talk about for hours. We don't need to. High level today, if you want to learn more about it, we've written on it. I can talk about it. We can speak at happy hour later today, whatever you want. Let me know afterwards. Fair market value, again, 5 simple steps. Keep it simple. Identify the background, relevant facts, and assumptions. What are the specifics of our particular arrangement with a physician, key opinion leader, healthcare provider? Just write down have an agreement, write it down. What's the background? What benchmarks do you have available? Most healthcare professionals, there's numerous surveys out there now. There's numerous companies. We have a tool ourselves that does this, where you can go and you can type in information for your type of arrangement, and it will give you a range of benchmarks for a speaker, if you will. a speaker that's in a different state, a national speaker versus a regional speaker. There's lots of information out there for life science companies, benchmarks wise and tools wise to help with that. But also, what are others paying in your market for similar services? You're paying this much for this type of event. What are others paying for that type of event? Sometimes the events that host those places can help you with that. Sometimes just talking to other physicians can help with that. Sometimes the providers can bring a copy of a prior agreement, maybe redact some of it and show you, this is what I was paid to speak previously, or this is what I charge everybody for this topic to speak. Having that type of information, gather that type of information helps you determine fair market value. You can always pay a third-party appraisal to do that, but you can also do some of that legwork yourself. Once you have your background facts, once you have your market data, identify the facts that change the value. So something that might change the value is the physician's required to travel from state to state. Did you consider travel costs? The physician that you need to do this really needs to be well-known versus a physician that's not well-known. The physician has never spoke before versus a physician who spoke 100 times. Someone who's an expert in this particular device that developed this device versus someone who's learning to use the device. Evaluation has 3 approaches. I'm going to talk about those on the next slide at a high level. And then you reconcile numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4, talk about your approaches, and then you document your conclusion. So if you were determining fair market value for your speaker program, go through these steps, write it all down, make sure it's logical, have somebody vet it. If you were looking at this piece of paper, and I think fair market value ranges from this to this, would you come to the same conclusion? If they don't come to the same conclusion, did you document your facts correctly? Or is perhaps the arrangement that you're proposing undervalued or overvalued? Just a quick way to think about it yourself. But what are the 3 valuation approaches? And this is where we oftentimes get complicated. I said I'm not going to get complicated. There's 3 approaches. The last one's the income approach. We're not going to talk about the income approach. The income approach has to do with the value of revenue streams. We're not looking at revenue streams from referrals as we're doing this. We're just going to consider the cost and market approach. Cost and market approach, very simple. You're buying a house, you're selling a house. What's the first thing any of you would do if you're buying or selling a house? You're going to pull up your computer, you're going to go to Zillow, and you're going to type in the specifics of your house, like you would the specifics of a physician arrangement, and try to find houses in that same area for the same square foot and see what it's valued at. You might find that across town it's more expensive. You might find that in this area it's less expensive, the same with valuing a physician arrangement. You may engage a realtor and say, hey, realtor, I'd like to sell my house. Tell me what the value is. Mm-hmm. Same thing, market approach. They're going to do that same type of work for you. Alternatively, what most of us, or at least I wouldn't do, but I'd consider it fun. What would it cost me to build the house? I've got to buy the land. I've got to buy the materials. Do I have the knowledge myself to build the house, or do I have to pay somebody to build the house? Add up all those costs. And then most importantly, what is the time that you're going to put into doing all that work? Did you value that? So then you're going to have 2 values, the market value, the cost value. You compare them and you determine what the house is worth. We do the same thing with physicians, healthcare providers, key opinion leaders. We just use benchmarks, what other arrangements are, what it would cost to employ a provider versus the cost to you buy or build it, you find somebody in the market to do it, or you employ someone yourself. So fair market value, 5 steps, high level. It's the same thing you do every day. You just don't always realize what you're doing. But the key to all of it is documenting why you did it and documenting how you got there, making sure that it makes sense. Sometimes you need help to make sure that it makes sense, and that's where you can get someone on the outside to help you do that. So we've got 7 minutes to keep everyone on time. I want to quickly, we handed out a checklist, and that checklist is what I'll cover on the next few slides. I did not reduplicate that checklist on the next few slides. I just highlighted a few things from the different sections that I thought might be helpful. So I will quickly just breeze through these and point some areas for specific attention, but I'm going to leave most of our remaining time for any other questions. So the first section is called engagement process in your checklist. That's really about just defining the compliance items. It's about defining what your process is for approval. To your question about how do you start this, what's your process? That's what that section starts going into by documenting those items. The next section is And I changed this slide right before the meeting, because as I was going through it, practicing, it's document, 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 document. You've heard me say document, you can't document enough when you're getting into these things. That also helps make sure that if you're documenting things, you can almost always, I should say almost always, I'm not legal counsel, but I was trying to show that I had good intentions. I would have it documented how I got there. Wow, I thought it was logical.
And when investigating a complaint, the government looks upon that very favorably, because then you can look, they can look back and you can say, see, for the past 10 years, we've had this, here are our processes, here's where we've documented our intent, here's where we've documented these relationships, and here was our business case for doing this. That is going to work in your favor. Saying, well, what I meant to do was, with no documentation is not as helpful.
So the next section of the checklist is about documenting that process. We go into fair market value. I think my 5 steps are terrific, but this asks more specific questions about 5 steps. Where we've got, what was the criteria to be paid? When I read that, I think, what did the person have to do to be paid? In the non-life science world, but I guess this could work in life sciences, medical directorships often go wrong because the physicians are being paid but not doing anything in return. So it's automatically perceived as a kickback. So any of these arrangements you have, make sure there's objectives to be paid and something had to be accomplished to be paid. I think that's probably the most important item there. If you have multiple speaker arrangements and they're not uniform, you need to know why. If Sarah's getting $1,000 a day to do one speech and I'm getting 100, but it's the same topic in the same location, is it because Sarah's referring a lot more business? The government absolutely looks at that. Is there a relationship between higher payments and referrals or not? And talk about some of your analytics work. It's really easy to do that these days with analytics. Speaker program fees. These are some really cool items related to those programs. We've covered several of these just off and on throughout the day. Advisory board. I think the advisory board ones also, it's really making sure you understand what you're paying for and the expectations of the provider. What are the expectations of somebody to participate? And what are they being paid for? Making sure you assign the value to that burden. Consulting arrangements. Make sure you value the arrangement correctly. That's probably the easiest one to go wrong. There's lots of consultants out there, but not all consultants are worth the same amount of money. And not all services are worth the same consulting fees. So really make sure you're looking at the qualifications and experience of a consultant, and your value changes based on the service, the type, and how that value in the consultant moves. There's a few others on there that we look at that is highlighted, just others. But if we want to go into any of those in more detail, happy to, but wanted to make sure we left some time for questions. I know that was quick. I can talk fast, but I wanted to wake us up a little bit and keep it high level.
Yep, got a couple questions, I guess, on it. One on the, trying to make sure that your fees are relatively consistent with market. That is an easy thing to say on paper. It is a very hard thing to do in reality, right? Especially with physicians. One physician you talk to may be perfectly happy with $200 an hour because he's doing it because he or she, loves the research, loves the space, whatever it happens to be. And the next person's going to tell you, nope, sorry, I'm not going to do that for anything less than 800. What do you generally guide as a percentage difference to figure out what your outliers are? And, what, I guess, additional documentation would you provide for those outliers?
Yeah, so fair market value is a range. Fair market value for a particular service, there absolutely is a max, and there's probably a number that's too low as well. Underpaying can sometimes be as problematic as overpaying. So it's a range. And the definition of fair market value has to do with bona fide bargaining and negotiating between two well-informed parties. So I know what I'm talking about, you know what you're talking about, we're coming to an arrangement. You will run into some situations where the right person for the job wants more money than what fair market value was for everyone else. You have to document why that person is the exception. Why is that person worth more? And it can't be because of their referrals. If it's because of the referrals, I don't want to say it's kickback, but it's problematic. If it's that person is the right person, documenting why that person is the right person, documenting your efforts to negotiate lower compensation, documenting that you had no other alternatives to pay somebody within what you thought was fair market value. So there's lots of intricacies of those types of arrangements. But you will run into those situations where the physician, and the example I said, the physician said, here's my contract. I charge everybody across the country this much to do this presentation. Every hospital I've done this work for, this is what they pay. I understand you've had other physicians do something similar, but I'm the expert and this is what I do and this is what I charge. Take it or leave it, you're right into that. But you want to be able to document those things. And that's where you just have to be careful to make sure it's an appropriate relationship from that perspective as well, that you've considered that this has to be that person.
And then I guess more broadly, from a Sunshine Act perspective, I thought there were some exceptions or carve outs for startup companies who were pre-commercial. Is that not the case?
That is not my area. Tyne, I don't know if you have anything on that, or Sarah, Sunshine Act carve outs?
It may be something that we need to check and get back. I'm not sure. I that off the cuff. I don't know, Tynan, if you do.
I don't know that off the top of my head, but we can certainly look.
Great, thank
We're
you.
happy to check and get back to you.
Love it. Other questions?
Good questions.
This is the fun stuff. This is what we do with clients all day, is answer questions. It's fun. So I like the hard questions. If it's a valuation thing, I'll try to give you an answer. We get into specific regulations, I get a little stuck sometimes.
If there's any questions from those online, please feel free to drop those in the chat as well, or speak up. When's the best time for, sounds like earlier is better for engaging if you need an external
It's
counsel in these areas?
if you're looking for, a consultant or a compliance professional to help you structure these, any time you can have a conversation. A reputable person will be honest with you about, you're not ready for this yet, or you shouldn't, let's have a conversation, but we're not ready to enter into an engagement just yet. Think about these things, talk to that person. From a valuation perspective, I would say, as opposed to trying to value arrangements individually, focus on a program. So you came up with, I have a speaker program. I valued the program at the beginning, and I've used this program to then determine what to pay everyone else versus everything individually all the time, when you're oftentimes coming back to the same number. So there's ways to also save money if you're paying external fees, to structure those engagements to be more all-inclusive versus project by project by project. In life sciences, there's a lot of different companies have key opinion leader tools and dashboards that will help you enter in the provider's years of experience, location, national, regional, let's say 10, 15 criteria for a speaker program. And then that will help you say, low, medium, and high range might be this. And here's some qualifications for what a high might be, here's some qualifications for what a low might be. Having one engagement that does something like that for you might be less costly than having 100 engagements that help you value 100 different arrangements. I don't know if is that helpful?
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, right? Kind of getting a baseline before you're engaging with a specific individual, really. And yeah, fantastic.
Sarah, the one other thing to mention, you had it on one of your slides, is the GCPG, the general
Compliance program guidance.
Yep. So they've started putting out the government has started putting out sort of specialty or provider specific guidance. So Sarah talked about the 7 steps of a general compliance plan, but as the government says, well, here are the things that we're finding within these certain segments of healthcare, they are doing, again, pretty good education, presentations, work requirements, specific to those sectors. At a recent conference I went to last fall, somebody asked when they could expect one for pharma and med device. And they said that that's in the works. And so it could be that in the 26-ish timeframe, there will be a more specific guidance to the things that life science organizations need to have top of mind. Speaker programs, obviously one of them, but there are a number of other things that we're starting to see come to fruition. And so just have that on your radar screen as to, in the next year or so, there could be something out that's a little bit more specific to a life science, pharma. The comment at the conference was, it's going to be out for pharma, but what about med device? And the response was, well, it's going to really impact or be for both. So that's just one thing to be aware of, to have on your radar screen.
Yeah, thanks, Tynan. That's a great point.
We did just get a question come through from Chris, asking if we could discuss the risk of personal liability in the event of wrongdoing.
I think, the short answer is that can happen. I can't, there's no magic wand, unfortunately, to say, you're going to be, excluded from that. And I'm not an attorney. We are not a law firm. So that's my other disclaimer. But, when you look at other cases, I mean, the Yates memo did say, we can come after the leaders of an organization as well as providers. Particularly when there is intent, particularly when there is something egregious that is happening, and we have seen that to some extent. But there are a lot of steps to get there, and that's where to support the organization and to help prevent that. That's where we think through, as kind of mentioned, the general compliance program guidance, the federal sentencing guidelines that I talked about, kind of how you structure your organization around compliance, and you document, start now, document all of these things, document the intent of the relationships, get an F&B opinion, get a CR review if you need one, follow these steps. That's going to all help work in your favor, as this is the tone at the top within the organization, is that we want to be doing things the right way. There was no malicious intent in what happened. All of those sorts of things. Sure, if I answered your question, I think that was Chris. My little pop-up went away. You can let me know if not in the chat. Yes, thank you. Good. Very good. Good questions. Any others?
Thank you all for joining us today.
Yes.
If you have questions afterwards, reach out. Again, if you want the checklist, take it. If you want a PDF copy, we're going to send that out as well, so you don't have to back and forth.
Yes,
And then
definitely.
a soft copy of the slides with links.
Yes.
Yes, so
Outstanding.
we will send a wrap-up email with the PDF for the slides and as well as the checklist. Did you have another, were you getting ready to ask something, Justin? No. Okay. I just wanted to say thank you again to PYA. Thank you for everyone joining, and to Sarah and Zach. It's extremely informative for me. I know hopefully it was helpful for others. I think it highlights areas that probably don't get enough attention, honestly, and that are often kind of fall low on the priority list for startups in particular. So a lot of good information. Tynan, you kind of started to allude to it, but my question was, what processes and software that we could use to track these things, but that sounds like a much longer conversation itself, so.
There are lots of vendors out there
Yeah.
from a software perspective.
Sure, so, thank you for those joining virtually, for those that are in person here, or maybe in Knoxville joining personally or virtually. We'll be going over to the networking event, the Beer and Biotech at, Schultz Brow. Here, following this event, we'd love to see you there. A lot of good networking, and thank you again to our speakers. Thank you all.
Thank you.